Myung raised up to 3 horns. In a world that had been accelerated 8 times, he could see Wang Chenglin's movements clearly. For decent humanity's 10 strongest, 3 horns would be enough. Wang Chenglin was still smiling. There was no sign of alarm even when his arm flew off. This was a completely different face from the past. At the time when Myung had just wiped out the forest of death, Wang Chenglin had asked why he had erased the place where they had spent 40 years together. But actually, while his life was at stake, he was calm. Be happy. Most of the shadows I sent died. You won and I lost. Yes. It was precisely that attitude. The reason why Myung continuously became ensnared. It's different. It was strange. The image of Wang Chenglin that Myung knew and his appearance now didn't coincide. It was doubtful to say that it was because he had met Snow, because it was not easy to change human nature. So if he thought of Snow as fake, then the Wang Chenglin before his eyes was real. But he seemed to know of his defeat early. Was it resignation? You look disconcerted. Because I look different now from how I did in your memory. Myung didn't respond. He only looked at Wang Chenglin with a gaze similar to an abyss. Crunch. Wang Chenglin stepped on his own fallen arm. Then he spoke to Myung. Do you know this? My name is not Wang Chenglin. Myung's eyebrows furrowed instantly. Wang Chenglin. It was his name that Myung remembered. In fact, perhaps Myung was the only person in the underworld who knew his real name. But the person himself said it was not so. Myung shook his head. You are Wang Chenglin. What is the basis for that? The past you experienced. Coincidentally, Myung knew Wang Chenglin's name. But he didn't remember how he knew. Your name is in Solomon's Hall of Fame. Wang Chenglin chuckled. Stupid. Solomon's Hall of Fame only shows names you recognize. Certainly your real name would not have come out there. Isn't that so? Those were the only 2 characters that came out in Solomon's Hall of Fame. However, Myung had not been left even that. All that had been left was Myung, no name. Haven't you ever thought this way? Have I really returned to the past? Perhaps isn't it that I am thinking of another person's life as my own? What does that mean? In the forest of death, there was another assassin that was more powerful than me. Number 0. I named the person Myung. Number 0. There was no number 0 in the forest of death. If so, Myung had erased Wang Chenglin and became number 0 himself. The great assassins have existed as number 0 to number 10. Suddenly, a masked man appeared beside Wang Chenglin. He slowly took off his mask. And the status viewer you are wearing, that is that child's. If you look at the bottom of the status viewer, you will be able to see his real name. The real name of Myung, whom you have not recognized. The man's face was completely unfamiliar to him. However, for some reason it felt familiar. Myung returned his horns and then took out the status viewer. Then he checked the other side of it. How? Myung's eyes shook greatly. This was something that could not be. When you arrive at the Blue Temple, it was normal to receive a new status viewer. But for some reason Myung's status viewer had a name on the other side. When he recalled, he remembered opening his eyes faster than everyone else in the beginning. Wang Chenglin also knew that Myung was shaken. Wang Chenglin looked directly at Myung and said, and so I want to ask. But he came closer by 1 step. He hadn't been planning to win against Myung through fighting power from the beginning. It was the reason why Myung couldn't become his pupil. Also, he was certain that Myung would be shaken by the truth. Snow had asked him not to reveal the truth, but Wang Chenglin had no plans to conceal it. Wang Chenglin. No, now he who had become just a shadow had asked, Bastard, who are you? After receiving the order, he assassinated someone. A complete stranger. He had taken away the life of a person who he didn't know at all. That's who he collected the status viewers from, the people he had killed. He took a peek at their lives, which were written on the status viewer. That was how Myung was able to protect his consciousness. He thought he had protected it. Khaha. You are no different than doppelganger. Lucifer chuckled. His stomach really hurt so much that he couldn't withstand it. It was because Mu Young's state was no different than doppelganger who stole other people's lives. You can become anyone. You can't become anyone. This was the faith of a doppelganger. The ability to become anyone but unable to keep one unique nature. If the past was all a lie, Mu Young couldn't help but rethink about his own nature. Who am I? It wasn't a philosophical question. Mu Young just sincerely thought about his appearance. If the words Wang Chunlin spoke of were true, for what did he run towards for so long? Perhaps this might be related to the reason why Mu Young places so much effort into acquiring his own uniqueness. At that moment, Mu Young's body started to be sunk into darkness. You could have become a much deeper shadow than anything else. As no one knew you and even you didn't know about yourself. Wang Chunlin opened his eyes widely. He could have become whatever he wanted, but among them, the one most fitting was a shadow, as a shadow was also just an imitation of others. Perhaps you could say that a shadow reflected Mu Young the best. If it is you, you could have become the greatest shadow. Then you would be able to understand the desires of this world. If you listened to the sounds of the world, you would be able to walk the same path as me. The sounds of the world. It was a collection of all kinds of desires. By following the world's desires, Wang Chunlin created the forest of death and killed people. All of it wasn't Wang Chunglin's will. Only the world's will. If Mu Young was also to become a shadow, he would walk the same path. Wang Chunlin was anticipating the birth of the greatest shadow. For him, he would give up his life. If he could bring out the shadow in Mu Young, he was happy to be a sacrifice. I won. Wang Chunglin's smile deepened. Although Snow had lost, Wang Chunlin had won. Light. Of course he could become light, but it didn't suit him since birth. Snow had really dreamt of it. The dream existed to be awakened. From the beginning, it didn't make sense for a trial to be made to persuade someone. Snow's thoughts had been too one-sided. On the other hand, Wang Chunlin was strictly based on reality, as Wang Chunglin's goal from the beginning was creating a shadow. Mu Young's body was soon wrapped around complete darkness. 5 horns rose up. Normally, at most 4 was possible, but 1 had been added. The horns soon merged into 1. Only a huge horn was left on Mu Young's forehead. Also, a black haze even covered Mu Young's eyes. An overwhelming presence scattered the area. A black energy dominated all of the surrounding areas. Yes, it's that appearance. A true shadow's appearance. Wang Chunlin was thrilled. He was truly at the climax. The pinnacle point of his plan. If he was just a shadow, Mu Young could be seen as a king of shadows. Swoosh. Mu Young suddenly made a move. In a blink of an eye, he took away Wang Chunglin's life. And he also took away number zeros like a fly. Swoosh. Swish. The sword didn't stop. Then Mu Young ripped apart 2 corpses with his 2 hands. The 2 bodies couldn't even maintain the shape of a person. They were lumps of meat. Humans had become lumps of meat. Mu Young, who had covered himself in blood, started to quietly walk towards Diablo's trial. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The world was submerged in water. Afterwards, water evaporated and the world was once again submerged in the fire. Yug. Serafina stood up from her spot. As she looked around, most people had died. It was pure luck for her to be alive after all the suffering. In the end, if Bei Sungmin didn't save her, she would have also had no choice but to be dead. What in the world had happened? Something that had suddenly happened. As she got up fully from her spot, a few who had survived also opened their eyes. Fortunately, Ramiel was among them. What had happened? Serafina let out a sigh of relief. Bei Sungmin made a serious expression while he held his wand. All connection with the master is disconnected. Serafina spoke quietly. When you refer to master, do you mean Mu Young? Yes, the master told us to protect you. And he headed towards the altar by himself. That had happened. Serafina's eyes widened. When he suddenly disappeared, she thought something might have happened, but he had headed towards the altar alone. Even the series of events that happened right now should be related to my master. But then the signal had suddenly been disconnected. It was a disappointment for him to leave without a word, but she couldn't blame him. What seemed like an explosion of the century that happened just now was a bit understandable, as he pointed out that it was related to Muyang. Even in the meantime, he made his servants act to save Serafina. How could she not be moved? However, she was uneasy as he said the connection with Muyang had been disconnected. Then shouldn't we try to find him quickly? My comrades are already looking for him. But Bei Sungmin shook his head. Instantly, Serafina's heart raced. She never thought of Muyang's absence. At least to Serafina he was an angel and a truly strong man. The justice to keep in check with the demon gods by getting the god-killing spear. Also, he was also the man who touched her heart. But for him to disappear. Bei Sungmin spoke the next words bitterly. The altar has disappeared. Wiggle. The holy cloth had moved. The paladins who moved the holy cloth under Serafina's order tilted their heads. This is moving? I told you we can never take it off. Let's go quickly. However, that was all. Serafina's orders were absolute, and even more, this was an item they were sending to the Sage King. It wasn't something that the paladins could decide on their own. Wiggle. Wiggle. But as time passed, the cloth moved more fiercely. Why is it being like this? Well, wait, the cloth is. Afterwards, when they were in proximity to Mulalin, the cloth had come off completely. Within the cloth, a beautiful girl appeared. The person seemed to be on the borderline between girl and woman. Her name was Hyacinth. When the paladins saw Hyacinth, their eyes loosened. Their bodies shivered and their legs shook. They couldn't get a hold of her senses. I want her. I want to touch her. That girl's body. But Hyacinth touched each cheek of the paladins. Ah. Then they fell down on the ground and their bodies shivered endlessly. They had continuous seizure and their energy flowed out like rainwater. A man, even a woman, wouldn't be able to withstand Hyacinth's touch. Hyacinth then turned her gaze to the holy cloth. As she touched the holy cloth, it turned into a beautiful white dress. We have to prepare. And we have to welcome him. Hyacinth, who quietly murmured, turned their gaze to look at Mulalin. Mulalin. The biggest holy city and the place that supported humanity. All organizations, big or small, were connected to Mulalin. You could say it was like the center of humanity. In Hyacinth's eyes, Mulalin seems like a jewel. I need to give that jewel to him. Hyacinth had been absorbed into the doppelganger, but with Alexandro's help, she was able to revive from the remains of doppelganger. Through that event, she lost her memories and became a person who gained a completely different power. At this moment, as if it was some sort of order, there were thoughts that filled her head. The world is filled with chaos. He alone will rise up. Prepare to greet him. Hyacinth didn't know who this person was. But as she tried to remember him, she missed him more and felt sad. In addition, the fear she first felt was imprinted on her. This fear was something that was imprinted on doppelganger and not her. At times she would think of completely emotionless and cold eyes. A fearless and yearnful person would rise alone. He would reappear into this world after realizing his true self and gaining infinite potential. The only person who Hyacinth should follow. For now it was the waiting phase. However, she had no doubts that he would come to meet her one day. And to do this, Hyacinth was going to prepare a present. Hyacinth drew a picture in thin air. Drawing was Hyacinth's specialty. He liked my drawings. She was unsure of some things, but she was able to remember one thing well. That he had concentrated on Hyacinth's drawings very hard. Faith had become a strength. Soon a drawing popped out from thin air. A beautiful palace carriage and 8 pure white horses to pull. Hyacinth gracefully entered into the carriage. Saintess. Oh, Saintess. The paladins started to worship her. When she entered Mulalin, people who saw her kneeled one by one. That was how the 4th Saintess was born. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Time retrogressed. Even when he was first kidnapped by Wang Chunglin 40 years ago. Muyang at that place wasn't Muyang. However, at that place he met the real Muyang. They say he is the best assassin in the forest of death. They say he killed more than 10,000 people. Before he was brainwashed, there were people who were also gathered near him. Basically, after overexerting the body, the mind followed and the brainwashing proceeded. At first there were 200 people, but now there was only 50. 50 people blankly looked at the man who suddenly appeared. The man who was called Number 0 quietly followed Wang Chunglin. Would it be easier if I become a skilled assassin? I'm going to get out of this place. The place I should be at isn't a place like this. The people were desperate in order to live. In reality, Wang Chunglin really did torture them with hope, saying how he would let them loose if they tried hard. Then a man touched Muyang's shoulders. Yo, weakling. Why are you zoomed out? You're next to clean the corpse. Go clean it up fast. Weakling. It was a nickname that people called him. In Muyang's memory, he became that man. You are too slow. It's amazing how you made it this far. Even though your score is always last. The man's low gaze made him move automatically. It was because he was given the role to clean up the corpses of people who died during training. He gathered the status viewer as he cleaned up the corpses. Although there wasn't much on the people's status viewers, it was sort of like a hobby to him. He was just happy to read it. As if he was reading a story. It was his only resting place within the harsh training. When he was done reading all the stories, he left a drawing on a half-ripped book. His drawing skills weren't great, but it was his only entertainment he could do at this place. It was quite fun to make pictures of a story. Afterwards, he hid them in his secret hideout. If on one night, Number 0 didn't come to the place he hid the status viewers, this secret hobby of his could have kept going. The man gulped his saliva. With bruised eyes, the man was looking down on him. Would I die because I hid the status viewers? He had automatically replied to the man's eyes that seemed like they were asking what he was doing. I'm reading these stories and drawing pictures. The people's stories. These stories make me strong. They allow me to endure. So, do you want to read them? Slowly he gave the man the picture book he was holding. With the monster's fur he made a small brush, and instead of paint, he used blood, but it wasn't that horrible to look at. Number 0 slowly scanned his pictures. And soon the man disappeared in front of his eyes. He took the book, but the man had no intention to stop him. Instead he placed his hand on his cold neck and let out a sigh. Phew, he really is like a ghost. Swoosh. Did about 30 seconds had passed? Number 0 once again appeared before him. Ah! The man let out a scream and smacked his butt on the ground. Thud. Thud. However, the next action of Number 0 was nothing he had expected. He threw few dozens of the status viewers on the ground. And then stretched out a drawing book. Is he telling me to draw? The man gulped his saliva. As he looked at the status viewers dropped on the ground, his nervousness and astonishment couldn't be helped but to be doubled. King Azar. Queen Bihasha. There were also status viewers from those who could also be known to people who just entered the underworld. How could he not be surprised? Those who were all considered the strongest were assassinated by Number 0. These were the evidence. His lips dried out. However, he wanted to see. As it was the man's only hobby to draw a picture after reading the stories. When he drew the pictures, Number 0 took them. And every week or a month later, Number 0 once again brought him more status viewers. When it had repeated about 4 times, the man's training was almost complete. After 2 or 3 training he would be brainwashed. Only 20 people survived from among 200 people. The number of people will further be reduced to half. And those that survived would become assassins after being brainwashed. What is your name? I don't think it would be Number 0. It was something that the man had also felt. And so he couldn't help but ask. Mu Young. Number 0 barely spoke. It was very awkward, but the man was excited as it was their first conversation. Myung. Not having a reflection. It is truly an assassin-like name. My name is. I can't really remember. These days my memories have been obscure. The drug he ate during training made him lose his memories. It was the procedural for perfect brainwashing. Everyone knew about this, but to live they had no choice but to take the pill. Number 0 once again stopped talking. Number 0 was like a child. Perhaps that is why he focused more on manly behaviors. Since there wasn't a child who didn't like stories and pictures. I don't want to be Mu Young but You Young exist reflection. I want to at least leave my shadow. I thought it would be possible, but I don't think it would be easy. As most of the people in this world don't even know who I am. Everyone lost their memories. It was also the same for the man. If there was a man who would remember him until the end, it would only be number 0. So please live until the end. Please remember me. For me, well, it would be hard to survive for a long time as an assassin. He shrugged his shoulders. Then number 0 gave him a status viewer and a drawing book. Does he want me to draw? He grinned and held the brush. They were in that sort of relationship. As if something existed but didn't. Fortunately, the man's brainwashing was postponed. The holy city of Mulilin's few thousand paladins had infiltrated the training ground. Most of the assassins who protected the place were dead, but the man had survived. They were just moved to a different training ground. He gradually raised his assassin senses as he trained with the other trainees. In reality, as time passed, the man lost his identity. The strong drugs were making him stray far from consciousness. Even then the man read the stories. The relationship with number 0 was like his last escape from reality. If he was to lose even that, the man would completely lose all of himself. For the status viewer to hold all the stories that happened to a person you don't know of, isn't it quite interesting? When did it become night time? What did you say your name was? A monologue. However, everything wasn't more than an echo of chaos. The man's memories were unstable. It was the side effect of the drugs. If this period of time passed, he would be completely brainwashed. He would lose himself and would become a human-killing weapon. Number 0 was watching him silently. In the end, the man even forgot number 0's name. Then number 0 slit his own wrist and made the man drink his blood. Whenever he did, the man was able to return to himself and draw again. Until the day Mulilin attacked again, those days repeated. Kill the shadow. Let's regain the god-killing spear. Mulilin's attacks were at a huge scale. They made a tightly knitted net and made them unable to escape. It was a movement to catch only Wang Chunglin. When Wang Chunglin stole the god-killing spear, at Suicide Hill, Mulilin had started a broad-scale attack. As Mulilin was focused on regaining the spear, they risked their lives in this matter. The number of paladins and priests who attacked the training ground reached 50,000. However, after realizing that there was a strong seal on the god-killing spear, Wang Chunglin threw it away without hesitation. Of course, he didn't just throw it away. Number 0. He held the god-killing spear and lured the paladins of Mulilin. It was to gain time and to make away. In the process, he gained numerous injuries. Even though he was number 0, he wasn't able to face all 50,000 paladins. Of course, the man's escape was also difficult. Mulilin was pure white. They wouldn't let someone who was even a bit stained escape. When Mulilin attacked, the man had died once. However, the man came back to life from death. I'm alive. When he opened his eyes again, his surrounding was a hell of fire. Everything was burning. Only corpses were rampant. In addition, the man's heart had a spear of light piercing through. It was the god-killing spear. The seal of it was lifted and revived the man. Then the spear permeated into the man as if it was being absorbed. What in the world? The man raised his head. His mind felt clear in a long time. However, when he found the person who collapsed beside him, he couldn't help but be greatly surprised for a moment. Muyang. Number 0 was dying. One of his arms was cut off and his waist was also half sliced. Why? The man was torn apart. And he was enraged. I know the brainwashing has been loosened. Now you can live your own life. But why? After meeting the man, Number 0 was slowly finding his identity. He didn't really have a reason to devote his life to Wang Chonglin or to save him. He could have just left, but I was in agony. I was happy to meet you. Please remember me. With those words as his last, Number 0 dropped his head. The man had realized after hearing those words that he wasn't the only one who was afraid to be forgotten. Number 0 was also scared that no one would remember him. Muyang. The man sewed his name in his heart. A moment later, the man lost consciousness. When he woke up, Wang Chonglin was in front of him. What is your name? It was when the brainwashing had progressed. His memories gradually faded. He couldn't remember his name. The man pondered for a moment before he spoke. Muyang. Number 0 had existed. Just he had died in the attack of Mulalin that would happen in the future. Muyang also was Muyang. He was just happy to be Muyang. Didn't he make up his mind like that from the start? However, there were lies mixed within his truth. Wang Chonglin. Everything was part of his plan. Blaze. Muyang was within the flames of Diablo. Diablo's flames were the source. It meant purification. It was the absolute strength that encompassed everything, including the birth and death of life. Afterwards, a spear of light began to come out of Muyang's heart. Gabriel's spear. The god-killing spear was Gabriel's spear. Everything Muyang had experienced might have been started by this spear. And he was able to understand why the Archangel Gabriel chose him. Blaze. Muyang held the spear that came out of his heart. From Susie's point of view, the Fighting King was definitely a bad person. But besides, when he taught her something, he tried his best to accommodate her. Of course, even now she had people she missed. She was especially worried about her real father, Bei Sungmin, and if he was doing well. She even cried and whined, but Susie realized that those things wouldn't work on him. The only way to be free from the Fighting King was for her to quickly achieve the 8th rank of the martial skills. But where are we going? Heavenly Maid Clan. Heavenly Maid Clan? It is a place made up of just women. At that place you will learn to be a woman. But I'm already a woman? Susie tilted her head as he spoke of his disingenuous words. Then the Fighting King spoke. All the martial skills of the mystery door start by knowing yourself. Also, as a benefit, other martial arts skills can be naturally learned. Depending on what you learn at that place, your learning speed from now on will be greatly swayed. Bei Susie's eyes widened. Getting stronger by quickly learning. For now that was her only goal. Arand frowned. Territory Guardian Baltan's expression also hardened. As two shadows invaded the territory, they were repulsed, but someone who shouldn't have died was dead. Siohan. Baltan quietly spoke. The one who directed and was responsible for the Dakibis, the one who was most enthusiastic in reinforcing the territory. The one who had no doubts while following their lord had died. Also, he was in a good rivalry with Baltan. Something like this cannot happen again. Arand spoke. Arand was the one who won first place in the competition of ranking Muyang had hosted. From the beginning he was the one who became stronger by just watching Muyang. Before then he just survived each day in the underground arena by living as a slave. However, now he was in charge of important duties within the territory. When he orchestrated Siohan's funeral, the veins of his neck bulged. There is a need for us to grow our strength more fiercely. It was possible. Especially in Muyang's territory, it was dependent on their resolution. Azura's temple and Merlin's dungeon acted in a very good way to develop. On top, this was the demon god's territory. A place where you needed to always win fights. Let's get stronger. Let's increase our territory. We cannot let Siohan's death be for nothing. Siohan was more passionate than anyone else. He was more worried about the territory and loyal to Muyang than anyone else. Arand and Baltan were going to inherit that mindset of Siohan. When they looked back, there were a lot of flaws. They were slowly becoming lazier and didn't really try to take the lead. Fush. Thump. And it was at that moment. When Arand's short speech ended, a huge pillar was placed on Azura's temple. However, this wasn't the first time they had seen this occurrence. It was already the second time. When Muyang had killed Moon, the cult leader of the Sky Devil, something like this had also occurred. And the guardian of the territory became much stronger. But if something like this had happened again, did the Lord destroy another great enemy? Ah, Hum and have given us a gift. All kinds of flowers were fully bloomed on the new pillar of the temple. Then small letters appeared in front of all the citizens. The successor of Ajura, has beaten the successor of Yacha, one of the 8 Deva guardians of Buddhism. Ajura is very pleased. The pillar of richness is placed on the temple. The pillar of richness will develop the territory even more and will make the territory more abundant as it increases the fertility rate. Also, it will help increase the development speed of everything within the territory. Is this a wreath? Baltan quietly murmured. It was so. This pillar was like a wreath Muyang sent for Siahan's funeral. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The Dragon Lord Hansung went straight far west. All the land in the west were floating in the sky, that it was also called the Floating Garden. And the owner of this place was the King of the Dragons. The size of the Dragon King was colossal. A huge creature that seemed like it would even pierce through the sky. In front of it, Hansung and Arkisa seemed very small. I found it. The owner of the sword fragment is one of the masters of the darkness, named King Slayer. It was a piece of information he barely found as he wandered in the sage's room and other places. The Dragon Lord was also familiar with the masters of the darkness, as he had received rewards from them a few times. King Slayer. If he had stepped up, this means that we need to prepare for an upheaval. As the sword fragment is a warning. What kind of upheaval will happen? The birth of the 73rd demon god. His name is Diablos. He is a wicked demon god who has the fire of creation and destruction. Also, a few demon gods are looking for the Ars Nova. Ars Nova, the Remingtons? 73rd demon god. It was definitely a surprising event, but Hansung read as an ominous sign while he was coming here. Perhaps it was linked to the birth of Diablos. However, more than that, he was more focused on Ars Nova. All demon gods were sealed by Lemegeton. However, their seal broke and they had settled in this underworld. Among them, it was known that Baal had the cover of Lemegeton. But there were a lot of contents that were missing. Among them was Ars Nova. It was told that miracle-like strong spells was engraved on the Ars Nova. If they can find the Ars Nova, they can break the wall of the Blue Temple. If Merlin, the guardian at this place and the balancer of this world, died, then the world would accelerate into destruction. Then is King Slayer looking for Ars Nova? It was a routine procedure for the demon gods to look for Ars Nova. As long as Baal has the cover of Lemegeton, King Slayer can't stop him. He would also know of this truth. Then, why would someone who needed to be within the darkness appear? King Slayer can manipulate time. Only he can figure out about abnormalities regarding time. If he had acted firsthand, this would also be related to time. Even the King of the Dragons didn't exactly know about all the truth. He was omnipotent but not all-knowing. Hansung once again nodded his head. Please lead me to the path I need to go. Gather the fragments of fissures. Although it won't allow you to stop them from finding Ars Nova, it will help you delay them. Arkisa will lead you. Roar. Arkisa made a loud roar. Then the King of the Dragons finished speaking. However, Arkisa alone will be difficult. Although you have earned a mighty sword, you still haven't earned a shield yet. Go to the Spring of Light right away and make the Dragon of Light Shandalton submit to you. Hansung widened his eyes. The King of Dragons granted him the right to make a contract with a second dragon. To prepare for the upheaval, the King of Dragons had started to make a strong move. Including the King of Dragons, the 4 beings with divinity. The Master of all the mountains, the Death Lord, and the Child of Moon were balancers that kept the balance in all 4 directions. In the middle of it there was the Blue Temple and Merlin. They couldn't act on their own. And so, like this, they gave others their strength and made them prepare. Of course, It was only Hansung's responsibility to make Sean Dalton submit to him. Sean Dalton was one of the greatest dragons that could even easily face Arkisa. If he wasn't careful, Hansung could even die. "I'll go right away." However, Hansung didn't care. He was a dragon lord. A man who did not know when to give up. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. And here there was another man who didn't know when to give up. Muyang swung his spear within the flames of Diablos. Gabriel's spear told Muyang many things. It was also a great help in making Muyang's own skills. The state of selflessness. He forgot about himself and everything else and only perfected his skills. He created, discarded, and then recreated. He didn't even know how much time had passed. However, this process was something that was necessary for Muyang. For him to forge his own path. And to finally find his own true uniqueness. Now he wouldn't wander around. Muyang would only go one path. And finally he saw true essence within the flames. A swordsmanship that was extremely pure and showed Muyang's colors to the maximum. Muyang's swordsmanship. He placed his name. The name Muyang was like his own proof that couldn't be removed even if he wanted to. Also, although it was a sword skill, it was like the combination of all the skills. It was the final product after he combined his knowledge and the knowledge he learned later through Gabriel. As he used his swordsmanship, the flames of Diablos split. The flame's essence that didn't budge once it started to burn was moved by Muyang. A moment later, Muyang took a step out of the flames. When he came out of the flames, Muyang's vigor was more organized than before. His outer appearance didn't show anything. He was like a normal person. The eyes that looked like the abyss and his murderous spirit, everything was erased. However, the power hidden within it was incomparable to the past. At last he had won over the trial and found his own path. With this, Muyang was able to exist alone. The darkness that ate up the whole body had all disappeared. In that state, Muyang looked around. Huge flames. These flames were all purification of Diablo. Only those who have overcome the flames had the qualification to live. Muyang had now earned that right. The essence of flames has been indwelled into the body. You have inherited the ruler of flames. All pure stats have greatly increased. Skills besides special skills have been increased to rank. That wasn't all. Muyang reaped the flames. Then Diablo's flames started to be sucked into Muyang. When it happened, his body bloated up as if it was going to explode, but Muyang didn't show any expression. Diablo's fire is the start of all fire. The flames that existed immemorial. That was the reality of the flames Diablo had. There wasn't really a chance to earn a flame like this. Even more, Muyang would be the only one who would be resistant to Diablo's flames. Even if it wasn't full resistance, it would be possible for him to resist a considerable amount of damage. Diablo was strong enough to even block Baal's attacks. Flames like them. How could he not want it? You have absorbed all of demon god Diablo's flames. The rank of continuous effect, ruler of flames, has increased. Nevertheless, Muyang was nothing more than ordinary. At least by looking at his outer appearance, there was no trace. If he had swallowed flames this size, normally the effects would reflect like a mirror and appear, but there was nothing like that at all. As you come close to extreme, you become ordinary. The Dragon Lord's sword was like that. He threw away all kinds of ways and was able to gain a classless swordsmanship. Although his movements were all over the place like a beginner's, the purification that was hidden within it was incomparably stronger. Muyang was also like this. If he was good, evil, strong or weak. If it wasn't something Muyang wanted to show, no one would be able to easily recognize it. Then Muyang went towards the end of the room. At that place he was able to find a huge egg that was engulfed by a small flame. Snow. Snow was the successor of Garuda. Also, Garuda was a sunbird. So when Wang Chunglin died, there was a message that popped up, but when Snow died there wasn't any. The reason was right in front of his eyes. Did she not die? Maybe it was due to the influence as Garuda's successor. It seemed like she didn't die after one death. The nature of the sun bird allowed it to resurrect if it was near the fire. Bong Huang, red bird, and phoenix were all the same. Although their names were different, they were all concluded as the sun bird. Muyang looked at the egg for a moment. The size was as big as most humans, but he heard breathing of a weak living thing. He kept touching Anguish but then shook his head. Didn't only light flow out of Snow's corpse and was engraved on this egg? Seemed like Snow continued to be born again like this as generations passed down. So that's why no one in the past knew who Snow really was. Muyang placed his hand on the egg. If an unauthorized person touched it, it would become a terrifying fire that would burn the person's whole body. But Muyang was the ruler of flames. These kinds of flames couldn't produce a large impact on Muyang. Blaze. Then greater flames engulfed Muyang. The flames poured on Muyang like the time Gabriel's spear did and reminded him of a new past. In the past, Snow died when the demon gods invaded. However, she was born again. However, Snow was different in many ways from the previous Snow. Snow, who was born again, had a lot of fears. She didn't step up and just watch the world perish from afar like a third person. Among those people, Muyang was one of them. The greatest assassin. The man who died after demolishing the forest of death. He killed so many heroes. Even the Dragon Lord, who was considered the hope of humanity, was killed by his hand. However, there was definitely a chance to save Muyang. If Muyang was saved, other people could have also been saved. But Snow didn't act. The forest of death burned in flames, the great calamity started, the Dragon Lord died, the balancers of all direction died off one by one, and finally, even when Merlin the guardian of the world died, Snow just stayed quiet. Snow watched the upheavals that happened afterwards. After killing all living things, the demon gods wanted to remain as true gods themselves. And so they summoned all other gods, even including fake gods. It was terrifying, as their upheaval was beyond one's imagination. And so Snow counted as everything she had seen as a dream. After the world was completely covered in darkness, Snow woke up after a small light broke out. And afterwards she started to prepare. Diablo, who she had seen when the gods were summoned. She decided to summon his strong powers when something happened. However, even in this lifetime, Snow had died. Not by a demon god but by Muyang. Not a dream but reality. Crack. Crack. As Muyang placed his hand on the egg started to crack. Then the egg completely cracked and within it a girl appeared. Plump. A naked girl fell to the ground helplessly. The body looked a bit younger than Snow he saw from the outside. It was this. Snow in front of him was the Snow he remembered in his memories. The Snow he saw from the outside was for some odd reason older than the Snow in his memories. She seemed a bit more mature than when he first saw her, so he was a bit puzzled. Perhaps as generations were passed down, the age of their body seems to decrease. Snow's body didn't age no matter how much time passed. That meant there was a certain number of lives she had. However, he needed to keep an eye to see if only the age of their bodies decreased or not. Boing. Boing. It was at that moment. Armful's cradle spirit came down from Muyang's head. And it entered Snow's body. Fung. A gleam of light spread everywhere. Afterwards, it gradually reduced in size and was fully absorbed into Snow's body. A moment later, Snow gradually opened her eyes. And as she laid there, looked up at Muyang. Then with an innocent smile on her face, Snow spoke. Dad. Dad. Muyang frowned. It wasn't because he wasn't familiar with the word. It was because that word came out of Snow's mouth. Pa. I'm not your father. Tilt. Snow poked Muyang's cheek with her finger. And smiled shyly. She was no different than pure white, but it seemed like she couldn't understand well yet. Swoosh. Muyang took out Anguish. Although he didn't have a lot of experience killing someone who died once, it wasn't like he couldn't do it again if he needed to. To be exact, he took Anguish towards the middle of her forehead. Paul. Then Snow touched the sword as if it was a toy. For her to not even know murderous intent and hostility. Was it not Snow but Armful's cradle? Didn't Muyang also see how Armful's cradle entered snow? Perhaps the two might be mixed. However, Armful's cradle's awareness was very shallow. You could say that it was the height of simplicity, but its fondness towards Muyang was similar. He was unable to organize his thoughts because he was also able to see parts of Snow in the past, who was pure white and sacrificed herself for humanity. Muyang clicked his tongue in sheathed anguish. And when he started walking after turning around, Snow tried her best to follow him. But the altar's door that was closed was opened. Muyang slowly walked out. Then Muyang couldn't help but frown as he took a look around. It isn't Suicide Hill. The surrounding was filled with turquoise. A place with a small park and a huge spring existed. This couldn't be the Suicide Hill. It was impossible to make the place that was bombarded by Diablos come back to life. Pop. Dad. Muyang turned around. Snow, whose age of the body became slightly younger, followed Muyang and called him Dad. It seemed like her memories weren't perfect. No, it seemed like all of it had been erased. Of course, although she had forgotten all of her interactions with Muyang, it seemed like she had the very basic knowledge to live. What he meant was things like eating and pooping. She was like a newborn baby who only had the instincts. It wasn't an act. As there was no way Muyang wouldn't be able to not differentiate. And so he decided to just leave her be. She had no ill intentions, and he even had the slight expectations that there will be a chance to find new aspects. As no one really knew Snow. Swoosh. Something flew through the wind. Muyang slowly raised his hand and caught the item that flew in. An arrow. A warning or a threat. Muyang looked towards the direction the arrow flew in. Normally he wasn't able to see anything, but Muyang saw it clearly in his eyes. A couple of elves with golden hair were hiding in the forest. When elves hid in the forest, most people weren't able to find them. The easiest way to find elves was to burn the forest down. Muyang raised his hand. Blase. Then fierce flames were created on top of Muyang's hand. Although it was nothing compared to Diablo's, he tried his best to create something similar to it. It was Muyang's own flames, which he created after combining few skills, placing Gabriel's feather, and analyzing the source of flames. It was called the Holy Fire. The Holy Fire instantly sprang up and burned the forest. However, it didn't spread. He just burned the place where exactly the elves were located. This strength. You fire dragons. Are you attacking to go after Shandleton's fortunes again? The elves were naked. They returned to their natural states because their clothes and weapons also burned when the trees burned down. Fire dragons? Muyang smirked. For a day to come when he was mistaken for a dragon. Fire dragons were a type of dragons that was famous for its ill tempers. They were able to use flames and lived near volcanoes. But Muyang walked. He went right in front of them and asked, "Where is this place? Are you saying you came without knowing?" This place, the Spring of Light, is ruled by Shandleton. This isn't a place where a fire dragon could do what he wants. Shandleton and the Spring of Light. Although he had heard of them, he couldn't remember them well. As even in the past, the dragon and the area weren't well known. There weren't any dragons who played an important role in the fight with the demon kings and the demon god, against all other species. They have all acted alone and were destroyed. Either way, the Spring of Light was very far from the Suicide Hill. I would rather be closer to the Noble City. Noble City was a huge city that was comparable to the Great City. Basically, all the 5 great clans besides the Lawless clan were here. Besides them, all kinds of clans had their headquarters at the Noble City. Crunch. It was at that moment. Snow all of a sudden bit the neck of the elf who spoke. Cough. Pa. Pa. Snow seemed to be very angry. She grabbed the elf's whole body and bit his neck in a persistent manner that the elf was unable to handle it. In the end, the elf was only able to continue speaking when Muyang forcefully took her off. Ugh, I don't know what you fire dragons are after, but while we are alive, you won't be able to take anything from Shandleton. Muyang rubbed his chin. He kept saying fire dragons. It seemed like there wasn't just one fire dragon who visited this place. That meant there was something hidden here that the fire dragons wanted. I came here through Diablo's temple. Myung concentrated. However, he couldn't feel any signs of Diablo's. But he was able to know about the remaining remnants of Diablo. Diablo had gone through this place. It was the reason why Myung arrived at Spring of Light instead of Suicide Hill. It seemed like even in the future he would have some kind of relationship with Diablo. Also, there was a high chance that the fire dragons were also after the remnants Diablo left. Pa. It was at that moment. Snow poked Myung's back. Kayak. When he turned around, a huge flame covered Myung. They were unfathomable flames that a fire dragon shot from the sky. Myung was also aware of this. Before Snow noticed and warned him, he was able to instinctively sense the appearance of fire dragons. Was this also due to Diablo's flames he had absorbed? Blaze. The surrounding area was burned up. Myung was in the middle of it. However, the flames poured out by the fire dragon didn't go past Myung. It was because Myung's whole body was absorbing the flames. Ruler of Flames allows you to absorb flames weaker than yourself. As you absorb more pure flames, your pure stats increase. The user Myung has absorbed the flames of fire dragon Gurkha. Strength increased by 3. Stamina increased by 2. Strength increased by 1. The fire dragon Gurkha was younger compared to most dragons. You could tell just by looking at its size. However, even Gurkha's flames helped raise his stats. However, there was a limit. No stats were raised after a few messages popped up. Did a fire dragon stop the flames of a fire dragon? That's Gurkha. The elves were terrified by Myung's appearance and the sudden attack of Gurkha. In reality, there were a lot of dragons that were aggressive, but they were quite prudent. They didn't just attack all of a sudden. Perhaps a different kind of energy from Myung had offended Gurkha. Myung slowly stretched his hand. He absorbed the fire Gurkha had. As he opened his mouth slightly and ate up the flames in his mouth, he felt an astringent taste. The taste of fire. The tip of Myung's lip lightly went up. For a fire to have a taste. However, Gurkha's flame was bitter. It hadn't ripened yet. On top, it meant that he was able to absorb flames. A fire weaker than me. Blaze. The holy fire was created in Myung's right hand. The holy fire absorbed Gurkha's flames and surrounded the place. In an instant, its size increased, and in that state, Myung's holy fire was thrown towards Gurkha. Plague. Just because they were fire dragons didn't mean they only used fire. Fundamentally, the dragons were able to use specialized true magic. A net made out of the fire was spread around fire dragon Gurkha. A barrier like a web was placed. However, the holy fire ripped the web apart. The dense and strong web instantly became tattered by the invader. Blazy. Soon, the holy fire was carried onto Gurkha's wings. As Myung opened his fist, the holy fire burned Gurkha's entire body. Hayek. A fire dragon is burning? This is ridiculous. The elves who were watching widened their eyes. They couldn't speak any further. The fire dragons were creatures that were born from fire. Of course, they had the immunity of fire. They occupied and lived in one volcano. They also absorbed fire and created them. Their scales that covered their entire body was especially strong against heat. That should be the case. But Gurkha fell towards the ground. He didn't die. Just he was screaming out loud as he twisted his body. Maybe it's because he is a young dragon, but hunting isn't difficult. Currently, Myung's fighting power was already above the top 10 humans. The Dragon Lord Hansung. Only about his level would be able to stop Myung. However, if he was to fight Hansung with all he had, Myung thought his win rate would be around 90%. If Arkisa fought with Hansung, then the probability would be 50%. You would be able to hunt a young dragon like Gurkha with a well-made party, even if you weren't in the top 10. I should be able to create a bone dragon. Myung hasn't made a bone dragon yet. There was no reason for him to not be able to make a bone dragon if he took away Gurkha's life right now and left just its bones. However, it was true that he felt a bit disappointed. Whatever it was, if you created it first, you would gain that much more. Gurkha was young for a dragon. It wasn't fully grown. Pa. It was right then when Snow poked Muyang's side. When he turned his head, Snow was drooling as she looked at fire dragon Gurkha. They say Garuda ate dragons. Muyang rubbed his chin. Although it was only a story, Garuda was a dragon-eating being. Garuda's successor would therefore also be in a close relationship with the dragons. As they called them fire dragons, one should be okay as an experiment. Muyang was planning to stay in the spring for a bit. He was going to find the rest of Diablo's traces and hunt the fire dragons that invade and make a bone dragon from the one best among them. Also, he was curious about Snow's true identity. Like Muyang, Snow was also from the past. Was that why? As he looked further into Snow, he thought he was able to find certain truth. Muyang nodded his head. Pa. Snow smiled brightly. Then she ran towards Gurkha. At the same time, a huge white crow image appeared on Snow's back. However, the head and wings were bright gold. As the crow-like image popped out, it opened its mouth and tried to swallow Gurkha. Garuda. After seeing this, Muyang gulped his saliva. The size was smaller than the stories, but there was definitely godliness in that crow. Perhaps bigger than Lucifer's. So Muyang was unable to help but think it was Garuda. It was hidden cleverly that even Muyang was unable to sense it. But as it tried to swallow the fire dragon, it showed its form without hesitation. He hasn't seen anything like this even in the past. Does it mean she wasn't just simply a successor? The past has changed, and Snow had also faced a lot of life-changing events herself. Although it probably wasn't real, she had earned the powers that Garuda's form had. Gulp. Then Garuda swallowed Gurkha. Literally, Garuda swallowed it in one gulp. Ah. After, Snow fell to the ground and let out a scream. Soon something that wiggled in her back popped out. A pair of small red wings sprang up. It seems like she didn't lose all her wings. Snow lost her wings as she was born again. Muyang thought she did. However, as she absorbed Gurkha, a pair of red wings appeared. It seemed like that sort of wing appeared when she eats a dragon. Although it was at most the size of an adult arm, it was a surprising change. Later, Snow got up. And then looked at Muyang. Pa. As if she wasn't in pain at all, she quickly approached Muyang and stood in front of him. She certainly didn't seem to have any ill intentions. Perhaps it was due to the assimilation with the Armful's cradle spirit, but she had only infinite goodwill. At least he was able to trust Armful's cradle. Who are you guys? The leader of elves alternately looked at Muyang and Snow. However, his tone was different from the past. He became politer. As Muyang didn't just make a blow on the fire dragon but even ate it up. In their eyes he could only be seen as an overwhelming being. An ancient class dragon. Or something similar to that. It seems like they don't know about Diablo. If they did, they would have made a reaction when they saw Muyang's fire. That meant that they were clueless about Diablo. It seemed like he had no choice but to look for its traces alone. Muyang made a short reply. I'm going to stay here for a little while. Then he turned around and walked towards the forest. The flames that were burning in the surrounding instantly returned to Muyang. After seeing this, no one was able to say anything regarding Muyang's reply. The elves with the golden hair gathered at a huge house. Their number was about 300. However, the mood was very serious. Wouldn't it be an ancient fire dragon? That has at least lived 10,000 years. I'm certain by looking at the transformation magic it was using. As one elf asked, the old elder elf replied, I'm not sure if he is really a dragon or not. However, as I can feel a similar purity as Sean Dalton, if he was a fire dragon, it is odd why he would attack another fire dragon. Perhaps it's because he is after the same thing the fire dragon is after? As you know, the dragons don't normally stick together. They don't go easy with each other just because they are the same species. However, we don't even know what they are after. That's the biggest problem. That even they themselves didn't know what that was. If they did, they could prepare for what they knew, but because they didn't know, they couldn't help but just fight. Then someone had another opinion. Let's give it to him. Although we don't know what it is, he would be able to find it. And if it is him, wouldn't he help stop other fire dragons? The elder closed his eyes. The fire dragons are selfish beings. We don't know when they will make this place a sea of fire. So, we need to let them know that this isn't a place they should burn down. How? By giving them the sense that you are happy at this place. Just until Sean Dalton comes back. If we pretended to serve them. It was a shocking opinion. The elder grunted as he crossed his arms. It was basically a choice to select the lesser evil to stop the worse. The elf persuaded the elder. We have lasted this long because of Shandleton's blessing and spring of light. But if we continue like this, we would lose both. Shandleton's place and the place we have worked on for over 1,000 years will be lost. A moment. If we forsake our pride for just really a moment, we can save them both. I don't think this is a choice I can make on my own. The elder shook his head in the end. And then started to speak. Gather all the elves. We are going to start a vote. We will decide if we are going to serve him or be enemies with him afterwards. There were about 4,000 golden elves that resided near the Spring of Light. They started the vote quicker than any other time. After only half a day, the result was given and they came to a decision. The house given to Muyang was a house made by weaving large trees. The inside was clean and there was a soft bed and a variety of decorations. Muyang first sat on the bed and then touched his status viewer. It was to check his changes so far. The very first, the achievement effect he earned by absorbing Diablo's flames. Achievement effect Ruler of Flames, S++, all pure stats plus 40. Good. Muyang nodded his head. It was almost impossible to find an item that was greater than an S rank. The achievement effect was more so. But ++ was added to it. This was incomparable to just an S rank. The fact that it raised its pure stats meant that there was that much meaning. However, this wasn't the only change. To check the rest, Muyang turned his status viewer. Class effect. Death Lord, Lord class. Kingslayer, Lord class. Archangel, Lord class. Says. Strength 540, 325 plus 215. Agility 537. 333 plus 204. Stamina 510, 340 plus 170. Intelligence 539, 284 plus 255. Wisdom 500, 315 plus 185. Fighting Aura 375, 215 plus 160. Magic Resistance 565, 165 plus 400. Spirit Ability 450, 300 plus 150. Evil Tendency 490, 360 plus 150, true. Divine Powers 544, 444 plus 100, true. Fire Attributes 490, 390 plus 98. Total level, 542. Special note, Lucifer's strength is sealed. You have succeeded Gabriel's strength. You are creating Muyang's sword. The God-killing spear is engraved in your heart. Not just fire attributes but true fire attributes. Even divine powers had that sort of name attached. Muyang smiled. Thank you Jonathan Hurd for the excellent explanation of Muyang's past. I have posted his comment below for those who are still confused about Muyang's past. So my understanding of things is the real-world events went like this. 1. Muyang comes to Underworld and is kidnapped by Wang Chunglin. 2. Muyang starts his training/brainwashing. 3. Muyang picks up a habit of reading the status viewers of people. 4. Number 0 catches what Muyang is doing. 5. Number 0 gives Muyang a few status viewers of the people number 0 killed. 6. Battle at Suicide Hill, first timeline not the one we're reading, happens. 7. Wang Chunlin sends out number 0 and a few others as sacrifices to save his own skin. 8. Number 0 wins battle and revives dead Muyang with Gabriel's spear. 9. Muyang is revived and takes the name Muyang for himself when Wang Chunlin finds Muyang standing there. 10. Muyang is now trained to be the ultimate assassin by Wang Chunlin. 11. He spends the next 40 years fighting for the Forest of Death till he breaks free and destroys the Forest of Death. 12. Story we're reading now. So the way I see it is Wang Chunlin messed with Muyang's memories but not as extremely as you might think. What Wang Chunlin changed was steps 2 to 9. Muyang really did fight for 40 years and kill all those people and read their status viewers. Muyang was the one who killed Dragon Lord and the other prominent heroes in the past life. All Wang Chunlin really took from Muyang was the memory of Muyang's only friend in the underworld, the reason why Muyang had a habit of reading status viewers, and the origin of Muyang's name. Honestly, if you think about it, only messing with those things makes sense. If Muyang really didn't accomplish any of the kills, but just had the memories infused into him and still managed afterwards to be able to train to his current level of badassitude, then that would mean that Wang Chunlin should have been able to mass-produce killing machines like no one's business. Really, all Chunlin did was take out the pieces in Muyang that stimulated his humanity and would get in the way of the brainwashing. He couldn't strip the name or the habit of reading the status viewers. Those were too deeply ingrained and honestly didn't seem like they would interfere. He took out the emotional connection to the actions though. What has been unlocked for Muyang is now his origins. All the power he accrued before has always been Muyang's own. The skills and knowledge is the same. It was stolen, but Muyang rightfully stole it from those he killed and pieced it together. It seemed like that sort of name was added because the fire attribute and divine powers Muyang had were purer than others. The divine powers of Gabriel and the fire attribute that was added when he absorbed the flames of Diablos were definitely different from the normal. His main stats were all over 500. Lucifer's sealed power was the only thing that concerned Muyang. Only if I could fully absorb Lucifer's power. The demigod-like power Lucifer had was tempting for Muyang. If he could absorb that enormous power, he was 100% certain he would be able to win against both Archisa and the Dragon Lord. Lucifer's strength was that great. As Muyang got stronger, he was able to feel Lucifer's strength through his skin. However, Lucifer was silent. It was because there was nothing Lucifer could do about Muyang who earned Gabriel's strength. He was just doing his best to keep his own strength. However, this was also just a matter of time. Muyang was certain that he would be able to use Lucifer's strength in the near future. As Muyang's divine power and soul became stronger, Lucifer's position gradually disappeared. So Lucifer chose silence. Would he cooperate with Muyang or lose even his soul? Muyang got up from his seat. Lots of people were gathering in the surrounding. Sign of elves. More than 4,000. About that number of elves surrounded the house Muyang was staying in. They didn't even try to hide. They bluntly surrounded the place. Perhaps they decided to make Muyang their enemy? Certainly, the golden hair elves weren't weak. If about 4,000 gathered, they could kill an average fire dragon. But if they did decide to go against him, he could only say that they were really stupid. The godliness Muyang showed was unstoppable, with the strength to just kill an average fire dragon being inadequate. They would have also witnessed it as well. Muyang softly opened the door. Then a magnificent sight appeared before him. All elves started to kneel one by one. And the only elf with white hair, the elder, approached Muyang and kneeled right in front on him. Our race has decided to serve you. Please tell us your name. He felt a heavy mood, but was it because of this? Muyang looked at the elder with interest. They wouldn't have just suddenly decided to serve him. When Muyang looked into the elder's eyes, he could get a glimpse of his years of experience and his wisdom. He wasn't fascinated by Muyang's strength. This was a deal. He had made a choice after seeing how Muyang didn't kill them when they first met. At first they killed depending on their gains, but now, when Muyang didn't think of them as his enemy, they learned to show tolerance. Muyang. Muyang, are you an ancient dragon? Dragon. A dragon. It was natural to make such mistake by watching the strength Muyang had shown. It was a place he needed to stay for a while. On top, he didn't want any hindrance while he was hunting the fire dragon. Think whatever you want. He didn't care how they thought of him. Muyang wasn't the type to be swayed by how others thought of him. He was the type who strictly walked his own path. I'm late in introducing myself. I'm the elder of the village, Dexter. If there is anything lacking, please let me know. We will try our best to find what you need. He was able to feel his heart and soul. It felt odd to just ignore his words. The materials to create Immortal King's equipment. He earned the essences of the Immortal King when he faced Moon and Doppelganger. However, he just had the essences and didn't have anything else to complete the foundation. He didn't really have the materials to complete it. Undoubtedly, the heart and bones of a dragon should be enough, but Muyang decided to pursue a greater greed. The High Elves who oversees the Spring of Light should have it. He spoke as if he already knew what he was talking about. High Elves were divine beings. They were like the emotional anchor of the elves. Because they were told to have the blessings of the moon, they had the tattoo of a moon symbol on their body. However, their numbers were so small that the elves had to protect them. The elder was just a figurehead. The true leaders were the High Elves. If the elder shook his head right then, he would have no choice but to find it forcefully. But thankfully the elder didn't do this. We do. He spoke calmly without any confusion or surprise. As expected. Muyang nodded his head. Bring it to me. As Muyang spoke, the elder gave a look to an elf behind him. The elf behind him instantly got up and quickly disappeared to someplace. The Spring of Light became known through High Elves. The Spring of Light. And the Light Dragon Shondalton. They were all not very known in the past. They were mentioned sometimes just from someplace. Nonetheless, they were known due to the High Elves who managed the Spring of Light. An adventurer passed out near the Spring of Light after a grave wound when a High Elf approached the man and gave him a potion. But this potion wasn't ordinary, it was an elixir. An elixir. A treasure among treasures that was told to save a life as long as the person wasn't already dead. The more surprising thing was that the High Elf didn't just have one but a few bottles of it. The adventurer got greedy, but after looking at the place where the moon tattoo was engraved, he gave up. I'm Ein. A beautiful woman who graciously bowed her head. She had a moon symbol engraved on her forehead. As the moon tattoo got closer to the head, it meant that the High Elf was that much stronger. Because she was given that great of a blessing, she couldn't help but be that strong. Muyang looked at the woman who introduced herself as Ein with a slight surprise. This place was safe until now because of you. The fire dragons were hot-tempered. There would be nothing weird if this place was already razed to the ground. As they didn't have respect and have a reason, they wouldn't have left this place alone just because it was the land of Shondalton. However, the reason was right in front of him. Bing. She was a superior High Elf. A being who was able to fight even a fire dragon. Nevertheless, although she can't be an opponent against an ancient dragon like Arkisa, if Ein was to collaborate with the elves, they would be able to easily take down the fire dragon Muyang had faced. My strength has all been exhausted. At most I can stop once or twice more. Ein pointed towards her pattern. The pattern had lost most of the light. There was circumstantial evidence that greater strength was used than gained when receiving the moonlight. She spoke with a serious look. I heard there was something you wanted from me. Ein looked at Muyang. A nobleness no other elf could come near. It would have been difficult for a normal person to even meet her eyes, but Muyang's eyes were the same as hers. I need a leather that received the blessing of the moon, and some clothing made with that leather. I would like it if you would make them yourself. There was no better leather to patch an armor than this. The blessing of the moon. Even more, if it was from a high elf like Ein, the concentration itself would be different for that blessing. The moon was also the strength of Ein, so it would be a good match with the strength of the Immortal King. However, it was very rude for him to ask about this. Elves normally didn't weave clothes for others. They were known to make only their own clothing and the ones for their children and their spouse if they find someone they want to live the rest of their life with. That's not possible. The elder stepped up. Mu-young frowned. I wasn't speaking to you. This also isn't a favor. Mu-young's whole body was in flames. Then a strong murderous spirit surrounded the place. Cough. Jurorke. The elves fell one by one as they grabbed their chest. However, Mu-young's eyes only looked at Aang. Then Aang replied. I understand. I'll make the clothes for you myself. Aang. Elder, it's all right. It's just weaving clothes. He isn't an elf, no? Aang also didn't put too much meaning behind it. This type of tradition only applied to elves. Mu-young wasn't an elf and therefore wasn't accountable for tradition. Mu-young didn't care what kind of interpretation was given. He just cared about whether or not she would make the materials for the immortal king's equipment. Mu-young once again absorbed the flames. He also killed his murderous spirit. Then the elves were able to breathe. However, to do this I need to measure your size. Would it be okay if I touch your body for a moment? You may. Then I'll visit once I arrange everything I need. Mu-young nodded his head. Then turned his body and went back into his house. The elves worked hard to make Mu-young as comfortable as he could be. The fire dragons didn't invade every day. Thanks to this, Mu-young was able to rest, although he didn't plan on doing so. But Mu-young cast a fishing line on the spring of light. Fishing. He was in thought for a moment as he hanged a fishing rod made of bamboo. Fishing for fish and not humans. From his memories, this was something he hadn't done before. While Aang measured his size and made his leather, she asked Mu-young to get her a sacrifice needed to place the blessing of the moon. The fish caught is different depending on who's fishing at the spring of light. He wasn't sure if this was true. When it was decided he would always catch a certain fish. So Mu-young needed to catch his own fish. He wanted to just smash down on the spring and pick up a dead fish, but this fish was necessary for a sacrifice. He needed to find a fish that matched him and was alive. However, no matter how much time had passed, the fishing rod didn't move at all. Was it due to the energy flowing from Mu-young? However, from the outside, Mu-young looked very ordinary. Unless he forcefully lets out his strength, no one would know of Mu-young's true strength. It wasn't different for a fish. That was why Mu-young had sat on one place for hours while looking at his fishing rod. Pa. Snow joked around beside him. After making a crown by weaving flowers, she placed it on top of Mu-young's head. At the same time, butterflies flew towards Snow. Among them, a few butterflies sat on top of the crown Mu-young wore. Mu-young was greatly surprised by this phenomenon. Normally, no living thing would come near Mu-young because of his murderous spirit. No matter how hard he tried to hide this energy, it showed that even small bugs avoided him. However, now it could be hidden even if he was conscious of it. By seeing how butterflies approach him and sit on his head, it certainly seemed to be true. You have gained tranquility. A stat that was suppressed has started to recover. Stamina has increased by 1. A suppressed stat? Mu-young tilted his head for a moment and soon realized. Did I just run too much until now? He just ran crazily until now. Thanks to this, he became that much stronger, but it seemed like he needed a rest. Nonetheless, there wasn't a time he rested like this after he had returned from his memories. Mu-young tried to enjoy this rest, although it may be short. It's hard. Despite all this, he felt anxious as he stayed still. Laughter came out as he thought he couldn't even fully enjoy a period of rest. At the same time, ring. The fishing rod shook. Mu-young quickly raised the fishing rod. It's big. He could feel the size of the fish as soon as he grabbed hold of the fishing rod. A heavy feel. Thud. At long last, when he raised his fishing rod, a huge fish collapsed in front of Mu-young. The size was so big that it seemed that it was at least 20 m long. You have caught the guardian of the spring of light Ballon d'Or, a giant body. If it wasn't Mu-young, it wouldn't be possible to catch it with just a crude fishing rod. Like the technique of riding the river on a leaf, The technique of reeling in the catch required complete control of your strength, but to Muyang it was as easy as breathing. The guardian of the spring of light, Ballon d'Or. However, what interested Muyang were the words that popped up. For it to be the guardian of the spring of light. Did you just catch fishes that were in sync with the person fishing at the spring of light? Or it might mean that only it was the only fish that was able to handle Muyang. Because he wasn't sure, he tossed his rod once again and instantly, a fish started to bite. You have caught the baby of Ballon d'Or. After Ballon d'Or was caught, the next fish was its baby. The size of the baby fish was only up to Muyang's shoulders. Gulp, gulp. Ballon d'Or continuously moved its mouth. When Muyang caught its baby, its movement became more violent. It was surprising for a fish to have a name, but for it to be a guardian. Muyang spoke as he released its baby. I need you to be the sacrifice. Although it might be a guardian, it was no more than a sacrifice as it was caught for that use. The results might be worthwhile to look forward to if the fish he had caught was this great to be used as a sacrifice for the blessing of a moon. Grog. The Ballon d'Or tried to go back into the spring as it moved its body. It was like a last-ditch effort. But because it was so big, even the ground shook. I should make it unconscious before I take it back. Muyang lightly clenched his fist and punched Ballon d'Or's side. Thud. Ballon d'Or's side curved in quite a bit. At the same time, Ballon d'Or's body stretched out. Muyang grabbed Ballon d'Or's tail. Thump. Then he started to move as it dragged on the ground. Gulp. With her eyes widened, Ayn raised her head. As if she couldn't believe her eyes when she saw Ballon d'Or. This was also the same for other elves in the surrounding. Ballon d'Or. Oh my gosh. For the guardian of the spring. The elves thought highly of Ballon d'Or. The reason was simple. Few hundred years ago, before Sean Dalton started to live at this place, Ballon d'Or had lived at this spring. It was the oldest and most mysterious fish that no one had caught. So the elves even gave food to Ballon d'Or whenever they went to the spring to pray. But now that mystery had been solved. The mysterious fish that no one could catch and instead ate up 20,000 people who tried to catch it was right now shown in front of everyone in broad daylight. How did you catch it? How did he catch it? Muyang handed his fishing rod. You caught it with this fishing rod? That can't be possible. High Elf Ayn was still in disbelief. Did she think Muyang had forcibly caught Ballon d'Or? It was better to show them than to explain it to them. He once again tossed the fishing rod he held. Then with a thud sound, the rock on the other side was pierced through. In conclusion, it was about movement and the balance of strength. Muyang was very confident in the movement and balance of strength, as he needed to do those things well in order to hide his body and erase his presence. However, Ayn still couldn't say anything. She also knew that Muyang didn't use any magical powers or any other tricks. A fishing rod made out of bamboo pierced through a huge rock and popped out on the other side. Logically, it wasn't possible. Muyang slightly frowned as he pointed towards Ballon d'Or. Offering. We can't sacrifice the guardian as an offering. You said that you would sacrifice what I caught. I certainly did say that, but for this to happen, all mountains, rivers, etc. had owners. Ballon d'Or was the owner of this spring of light. Although Sean Dalton took his spot, that didn't really change anything. And by looking at the nature of elves who lived around the spring of light, it seemed like they couldn't kill and sacrifice Ballon d'Or and only could thank it. Of course, he was going to understand their respect for it, but they couldn't force the same thing to Muyang. As for Muyang, Ballon d'Or was just a slightly big fish. Its baby is already in the spring. If I can't sacrifice Ballon d'Or, I shall sacrifice its baby. It was the only compromise he was going to make. If Ballon d'Or was the guardian, its baby was just a slightly big fish. However, it still morally troubled their minds. Elves couldn't do one thing or another. Grrrl. Then the awakened Ballon d'Or cried loudly. The guardian says to use it as a sacrifice. Ayn, who raised one of her ears, started to speak. Muyang spoke as he grinned. Did you understand it? It is mind communication. Mind communication. It was like understanding of the opponent. High elves had high empathy. As they tend to accept everything from their opponents, they normally died fast. That was also the reason why there were only a very few of them in number. Normally, high elves were limited to people or animals, but Ein seemed to be able to communicate even with a fish. You take care of the rest. Myung turned his back. Now was the time for him to retract the footsteps of Diablo. He went around the spring once. However, he was unable to feel anything that resembled his footsteps. Although I can't feel it, the fire dragons can? Until now, Ein and the elves stopped the fire dragons with their strength. However, the fire dragons were continuously after the spring and attacked. It meant that they were after something specific. And it was highly likely that it was related to Diablo. Nevertheless, it wasn't like he could just wait for the fire dragons to appear. A rest in a while was definitely great, but to Myung, rest was virtually torture. Pa! Snow leaped around Myung. After eating up a young fire dragon, she was more energetic. The red wings that appeared caught his eyes more. Do you know what the fire dragons are looking for? Snow ate a fire dragon. Perhaps she might know what the fire dragons were after. However, it was a bit awkward to ask. It was because he was still unsure how to deal with Snow. Of course, he didn't have much expectation. After she was born again, everything was reset for Snow. Her memories and her ability to speak didn't return to normal. There were a lot of times when she couldn't even understand Myung's words. Snow stopped for a moment. Pa. Then she grabbed Myung's hand and started to move. Did she understand? Myung moved and for now acted as Snow wanted him to. Through instinctive attractions, the fire dragon Muspel settled near the spring of light. The attraction that led it. It wasn't only for Muspel. There were at least 10 fire dragons that gathered near this place. They also arrived near the spring of light as they followed their instincts like Muspel. However, Muspel tried his best to contain its instinct. It was because he was quite older than other dragons. He was an adult dragon that lived for thousands of years. On top, there was a need to approach the spring more carefully. For there to be such a high elf. The high elf in the spring of light was strong. It was difficult for one dragon to attack. But the dragons didn't normally work together. They existed and acted on their own. If they gathered their strength, they would have already conquered the spring of light. However, they had no thoughts of doing so. Not too long ago, a young fire dragon had died. All the fire dragons knew that one among them had been killed at the spring of light. He was unsure if the elves killed it or something else, but this was important information. So Muspel gathered all the creatures in the surrounding. The numbers that were gathered reached a certain level. It hurts my pride to fight mere elves, but Muspel wanted to find out what was leading him here. To do this, he needed to know how to remove a bit of pride. If it was a fire dragon with a brain like Muspel, they would also do the same thing. If there are this many in number, we can just wipe out all the elves. Muspel was pleased. Either way, he did gather fighting power and he would be able to gain a result faster than other fire dragons. It was at that moment. From afar he was able to hear cries of monsters. Muspel spread its wings and ran out of his dwelling and went towards where the screaming came from. That is. Pa. Clap, clap, clap. A girl clapped her hands. A human was slaughtering monsters with a sword. Bastard. They were monsters he scraped up. He literally gathered all the monsters in his surrounding. The monsters that were supposed to face the elves were dying off by the hands of some unknown human. How could Muspel not get mad? On top, he was a fire dragon. Once he got mad, he needed to release his anger. Blaze. He let out a breath of fierce fire. The breath of Muspel, who lived thousands of years, could erase even a mountain. Oh dear, I was too worked up. The problem was due to this, he burned up all the surrounding monsters. Almost 100 monsters burned with only their bones left. It was when Muspel was planning to head back after believing he had repelled the invader. You have led me to a fire dragon and not Diablo. Muspel looked into the flames. As the man stretched out his hand, he sucked in all of Muspel's flames into his hand. Muspel was able to see it. The appearance of his flames flowing and absorbing into the man's body as if it was nutrients to him. How dare he absorb his flames? Kaya. Muspel burned up. He let out a horrible shriek and once again breathed out. This time he didn't look back. Maximum output. His breath really did have the powers to even blast off a mountain. Tasty. However, the man was fine. He wasn't just fine, he even made a remark about the flames as he tasted it with his tongue. It was tasty? Not painful or scary, but tasty? Muspel was dumbfounded. His ego took a hit. What's with that man? It was the first time he experienced something like this. There was rarely anyone who survived after they received his breath while he was living for thousands of years. Even more, there weren't any who absorbed his flames. Afterwards, the man looked at Muspel and spoke. Fire dragon hunting isn't bad at all. The man smacked his lips. At the same time, the man jumped up. No, when Muspel thought he jumped up, the man stood beside him. 3 pairs of gray wings spread as it spread light. But Muspel's body greatly shook. It was painful. His body let out a cry. His scales were torn off and his flesh was dug out. Although he was just hit once, he was able to feel the difference in their strength. He isn't a human. Even though Muspel thought the man was human by looking at the wings that sprouted, he could never be human. The man wasn't anything at all. Muspel was unable to figure out what he was. However, the flames within Muspel shivered. He quickly used magic to the light of tens of thousands of flames into the surrounding. Explosions of light that exploded on impact and ripped apart bodies. This type of flame was Muspel's specialty. There wasn't anyone who pierced through his explosions of fire. But the thing he faced fearlessly held one of the flames that were thrown and grabbed it with his hand. And swallowed it as is. Gulp. This flame tastes like really fermented kimchi. The flame didn't explode. The moment he swallowed it, it instantly became nutrients. Even further, he kept making remarks about the taste of the flames. Although Muspel didn't know what fermented kimchi was, this was unheard of. The unknown was fear. Muspel hasn't felt fear in a very long time. That was right. The man seemed to be fire itself. Muspel felt like the man was closer to its essence than a fire dragon like himself. Muspel spread his wings and began to run away. Muspel was astonished. Even his speed was no match. His main skills also didn't work at all. The current Muyang was like the fire dragon's natural enemy. The power flowing from Muyang's small frame was even stronger than the power of Muspel's overwhelmingly large body. Moreover, unless the flame was exceedingly pure, it would not damage Muyang at all. This fellow is a dangerous guy. It was truly fire magic. He might be the god of fire. Although there was no match for a dragon's fire because of its purity, it was a mistake that his opponent was Muyang of all people. A type of foe he had never encountered before. Muspel, who felt threatened, racked his brains. The heart of a dragon was filled with power. It was the same as the origin of a dragon. After all, if a dragon of Muspel's caliber squeezed out the power of his heart, its destructive power would be beyond imagination. Tedder. For a short moment, gooseflesh rose on Muyang's entire body. His instincts were telling him that this fire would be dangerous if it hit him directly. However, Muyang smiled all the more. I wonder what it will taste like. It was the power from giving his all. Every cell of his heart and body was trying to oppose Muyang. What would that kind of flame taste like? Muyang was not a gourmet connoisseur, but he was suddenly curious. This was because it was an unfamiliar experience. And Muyang didn't view this novelty negatively. On the contrary, the many experiences of failure helped him to make his Muyang sword. Quang. Muspel shot off an intense flame. It was more like a beam than a flame. The sky shook and the clouds were penetrated as it reached Muyang. It might be dangerous to be hit directly, but to sum it up, it would be okay as long as he wasn't hit directly. Muyang's divine flame blazed. He then rotated it around himself. Fire attracts fire. The setting of a counterfire. Thorn formation skill has been used. All resistance has greatly increased. Instead, agility has been greatly reduced. Muyang used his Thorn Formation skill despite this. Thorn Formation was a skill that decreased agility but in exchange, greatly increased physical and magical resistance. Then he wrapped himself in Gabriel's wings. The fire dragon, Muspel, gushed flames perpetually. However, Muyang was not overpowered. The flames that had been flying in a straight line were blocked by Muyang and split in two. There was gradual overheating, but not to an extent that he couldn't withstand it. It's delicious. In the meantime, Muyang was savoring the flavor of the flames Muspel shot. There was a little strain on his body, but when he tasted Muspel's flames, all his worries were forgotten at once. In addition, his skin absorbed the flames, then shrank and expanded repeatedly. Surprisingly, Muspel's real flame tasted like smoked pork. There was also the ecstatic feeling of eating when one was extremely hungry. You can enjoy the flavor of fire. Pure strength has increased by 5. Pure stamina has increased by 8. All pure abilities have been increased by 1 due to the taste calibration effect. Taste calibration effect? There's all sorts of things. Muyang couldn't help but grin. The taste Muyang experienced was incomparable next to that of a true gourmet connoisseur. However, all his stats had gone up by 1. If he tasted and felt many things, he was more likely to get additional effects. How could my essence be stopped? After spewing out all of his flames, Muspel was in despair. The fire's essence was no different from the final move or the hidden move. However, it had been blocked. Also, it had been blocked from the front. Muspel's ego suffered a severe blow and he was forced to feel even more terror. It's over. Muyang released his Thorn Formation skill. There seemed to be no more flavor to be gained from the fire dragon. However, there was much to be gained from this fire dragon's corpse. It's not ancient class, but it's the level right beneath that. The ancient classes were not common, so it seemed he should be satisfied with this much. Furthermore, none of the dragons that took part in this event seemed to be of the ancient class. If there were, no matter how strong High Elf Ain was, she would not have been able to stop them. As such, the gap between general and ancient dragons was huge. The ancient class. It meant that a dragon had aged at least 10,000 years. Dragons shed their bodies once again depending on their age. You could say that they shed their last scales. Although gaps existed with such ancient dragons, they were so strong they were incomparable to normal adult dragons. If the quality isn't good, I have to go with quantity. In no time, Muyang was calculating the quality of the dragon. It was a novel experience for a dragon to see him and run away. Maybe it was because he had already surpassed the strength of his past life. Although they weren't exciting, it was clear that there was a wider range of choices to choose from. Muyang unsheathed anguish and gripped it. At the same time, a huge horn rose on top of his head. It looked like Diablo's mountain goat horn. 32 times. He could maintain it for less than 1 second at best. However, the time Muyang could feel was more than 30 seconds. Anguish danced. And then about 20 seconds later, the acceleration was released. Muspel screamed. Twok. All over his body, his scales were penetrated and blood spurted from hundreds of thousands of holes. Even a dragon would die if he suffered this level of damage. This is still a bit difficult. 32 times was too fast. Muyang's body could barely withstand it. I need more strength or stamina. To use it properly, he would have to increase his strength and stamina stats. He only accelerated for about 20 seconds, but his body was filled with pain. Thud. Soon Muspel's enormous body slammed into the ground. Muyang slowly flew over it and reached out his hand. The art of death. Fire Dragon Muspel has become an undead. You have made a dragon into an undead after killing it for the first time. Fire Dragon Muspel has a personality as explosive as a volcano. Art of Death skill rank is A+++. Art score is 93 points. Firebone Dragon is complete. Name, Muspel. Strength 495. Agility 480, Stamina 510, Intelligence 450, Wisdom 450, Fire Attribute 550, Magical Resistance 550, Tendency, Fire Bone Dragon, Overall Level 510, plus ability to use Flame Cresting, Flame Baptism, High-Speed Flight and Fire Dragon Breath skills. His skin burned and fell off. A powerful flame was laid around the bone dragon, of which only the skeleton remained. As if saluting his birth, the bone dragon spewed flames. Indeed. Muyang nodded his head contentedly. The first. And because of the calibration effect of the skill rank, Muspel was stronger than he was when he'd been alive. If it hadn't been the first time, the overall level would not have exceeded 500. This is not the end. Muyang looked at Snow, who was far away from him. Pa. He didn't really care, but it seemed that Snow had taken a direct hit. The clothes on her entire body were half burnt. However, there was no effect on her body. Is it because she absorbed the dragon? Snow ate a whole fire dragon. As a result, a red wing also flew out. It wasn't strange that her flame resistance was so high. Her half-burned clothes suggested that she had not taken a direct hit. Even if she had devoured a fire dragon, she would not have been safe if she had been shot directly with Muspel's essence. Blasé. Snow hurriedly made her way to Muyang's side and opened her mouth wide. Then a small flame came out of her mouth. Cough. Cough. It seemed like an imitation of a dragon, but that was all. Muyang spoke to Snow. Where is the next fire dragon? Before he knew it, Snow became Muyang's detector. Quantity if not quality. Literally. Muyang didn't wait. Why wait for the enemy to come when he had a detector that could find fire dragons? Rather, it was better for him to go. And that way he could hunt easier. Dragons didn't unite well and clearly tended to avoid each other. The art of death. He reached out his hand to the corpse of a dead fire dragon. Then black energy came out of Muyang's hand and surrounded the fire dragon. Fire Dragon Asius has become an undead. As a result, the fifth fire dragon became an undead. Fire Dragon Throng, us, has been completed. Summoning all at once has the additional effect of raising all dragons' ability stats by +5. With user Muyang's ability, up to 10 fire dragons can be kept. The Art of Death skill rank has been upgraded. A+++. The effect of complete victory, Death Shepherd King, has been acquired. The name, Spirit of Death, has transformed into Power of Death. Title, Death Shepherd King. Class. Effect, Power of Death +50. Strengthens undead according to the Power of Death ability. 0.1% per 4 and 12.5% at 500. 5 fire dragons that were surrounded in flames roamed around Muyang. There were now 5 spots remaining. Apparently he couldn't make an unlimited number of dragon monsters into an undead. Indeed, if it had been possible, thus far Muyang would have been searching for tombs where corpses were instead of becoming stronger and killing enemies. Bone Dragon. A top-ranking undead. Certainly, the strength needed in creating and maintaining undead was extraordinary. However, rather than that, the new complete victory effect that he'd gained caught Muyang's eye. Death Shepherd King. Did this mean he now possessed a king's army? The name itself was not ordinary. In addition, the Spirit of Death had changed to Power of Death and had gained additional benefits. Since the Spirit ability was about 450, it would now be over 500 if these 50 points were added. It meant that the abilities of the undead that Muyang had just created and those he owned would increase by 12 to 13%. There are still around 5 more left. Muyang's gaze was different. It shone more deeply. It wasn't just about 10%. It was as much as 10%. 12 to 13% was not to be thought of lightly. The stronger the species and the higher the ability, the brighter the effect. This was because if the ability exceeded 500, then the difference of 1 would no longer be a simple difference of 1. 12% could become 24%. That was why he had to make a strong monster into an undead. Of course, it would have been perfect if there had been an ancient dragon, but this much was enough to satisfy him. Also, this meant that the majority of Muyang's undead was able to receive much more privilege. Not 500, but Muyang had quite a few undead that exceeded ability scores of 400. Muyang made the 5th dragon into a bone dragon and moved on. It was at that moment Muyang sensed something strange and turned around. At the same time, a huge pillar of fire shot up from the fountain of light. The pillar of fire reached the sky and was large enough to swallow the entire fountain. Muyang wiped his chin at the sight. The power felt from the pillar of fire itself was unusual. It wasn't difficult to identify the pillar of fire because it was familiar and somehow he felt a kinship with it. The footprints left by Diablo. The thing he had searched for but had not been able to find. Unable to find it, Muyang had gone fishing for it. Then he went on a fire dragon hunting expedition. But that was exactly what Muyang had been after. Something left by Diablo. It was the mark that he was passing by. He couldn't believe that Diablos would actually show up there. Muyang was very grateful for this. It was not an ordinary explosion. A great explosion. Due to the extreme purity of the flame, something was summoned along with the crack. The thing that was summoned also had a pure but shapeless flame. It was truly the essence of fire itself. It came from a place in the depths of a fountain. The thing that existed not within the spring, but further inside the ground had now come onto the surface. It was reasonable for Muyang to not notice. Ah! Fire Spirit King Ifrit. Ain's eyes shook. There were countless spirits, but the Spirit Kings had been named since ancient times. The Fire Spirit King always used the name Ifrit. As the name was inherited indefinitely, the power of a Spirit King was strong. However, thus far, there were no instances of a Spirit King being summoned into the underworld. Diablo was irregular. He was also a being that never used to exist in the underworld. The being that created variables by making cracks was precisely Diablo. And Ifrit was one of the variables created by Diablo. Intentionally or not, he was summoned to follow Diablo's fire. Following the whisper of the moon, Ain could identify the Spirit King's existence at a glance. There was no comparing it to the flame of a mere fire dragon. A flame that set everything on fire. She didn't dare even think of approaching it. Creak. Countless spirits sprang out from the Great Divide. Spirits from the lowest class to the highest, of a number expected to be in the thousands. O Spirit King! For what reason have you descended to this place? The Spirit King was the reason for the fire dragon's raid on this place. Even though Diablo's flames were hidden beneath the fountain, the fire dragons were instinctively attracted to its matchless purity. And was in a hurry. At this rate, it would be the end of the Spring of Light. The people who had conquered and were living in this place would walk the path to extinction once and for all. So Ain stood in front of the Great Divide. She was a high elf. Her communication skills were extremely exceptional. The spirits did not attack her. Instead, a large man appeared in front of her. His stature appeared to be way above 2 m. His muscles were covered in long red hair and his entire body was blazing. His flames craved destruction. Who the hell is he? Why does he want to burn everything? I was summoned following his flames and the contract was completed. In the future, many more unusual things will be summoned besides me. Pitiful high elf, does that answer suffice? Ifrit respected Ain, the top-ranking high elf. Naturally, whatever was in front of him would have burned up instantly, but the high elf could interact with everything. Of course, it was possible to communicate with Ifrit in some way. And Ain saw Ifrit's inner craving for destruction. The appetite for destruction was not Ifrit's. It belonged to he who had contracted him. However, the craving was so strong that even Ifrit was infected. Truly terrifying. Gulp. Ain swallowed her saliva. At that moment she knew that nothing would work. Be prudent, I beg of you. I give you my life, so please spare just my tribe. She fell to her knees. Ain was that desperate. The destruction of the Spring of Light was determined once Ifrit decided to do so. Furthermore, everything in the area would start to burn. However, there was a little bit of hope that they could avoid the effects of the fire. At the very least, the tribe's elves could survive and get out. However, Ifrit refused. I'm going to burn it all. No one can escape my fire. Ifrit had infinite confidence in his flame. The number of spirits that came out reached 100,000. Spirits continued to crawl out of the Great Divide. This kind of military power was of a standard close to the 7 mountains. It referred to the demon kings that possessed 7 enormous mountains. There were 3 criteria for classifying the highest grade demon kings. 7 mountains, 6 lords, 5 stars. In that number alone, even among the demon kings, only the most outstanding 18 met the criteria. Among those, 7 mountains was the lowest, but it couldn't be ignored. Some people described it as 7 mountains, 6 lords, 5 stars, but it meant that his influence was that strong. I beg you. Ain saw Ifrit's craving for destruction. She knew that he would never stop. If so, Ain could not stop either. Soon a huge fireball shot up along Ifrit's hand. The fireball emitted a light as bright as the sun. Everyone that had been watching closed their eyes, and at the same time, Ifrit threw the fireball. Ah! Ain screamed and closed her eyes. The string was pulled. Now there was no one who could stop Ifrit. But the explosion did not happen. Only the sound of a strong wind filled the air. Then Ain, who sensed something strange, opened her eyes. A man stood in front of her, with a long sword clenched in his hand. Lord Muyang. He couldn't believe it. Muyang was a foreigner. Furthermore, she thought of him as an ancient dragon. Dragons were not the kind to take pleasure in adventure. If it was not even their territory, they would not risk danger. She was assuming that Muyang had already departed. Even so, Muyang had stopped Ifrit. Also, he was not alone. There were 5 undead around him. Kaya! The fire-bone dragons screeched. The shapeless spirits were biting and swallowing while using fire to defend against fire. Strange. I can feel his fire coming from you. Even Ifrit hesitated. The familiar energy that he felt coming from Muyang definitely belonged to him. But Muyang was a completely different being to him, to Diablo. Diablo is also my prey. You are merely the process. Muyang said in a taciturn manner. When Diablo's name was mentioned, Ifrit looked at Muyang with interest. Your fire is pure, but it cannot match even mine. I am the king of all fire. He didn't deny it. Muyang simply had no intention of beating him with fire alone. Of course, he intended to use all of his powers to knock him down. For example, getting rid of the fireball by seeing the grain and using Anguish's power. There is a grain in everything. In fact, for Muyang, fire was only the beginning of his secondary abilities. An unfamiliar power that he had only just acquired. However, Muyang's true power was in none other than this one sword. Fung! Anguish cried. Due to Diablo's flames, the fire spirit king Ifrit was summoned to the fountain of light. Ifrit craves the destruction of the world. Stop Ifrit. Rewards will be awarded according to the level of contribution. The castle closest to the fountain of light. A noble castle. Most of the nobility were concentrated in the noble castle. The noble castle was the only place comparable to the great city. The words floated up for all the people residing there. Ifrit. Is Diablo the cause this time too? It's non-stop. The people who saw the words clicked their tongues. They accepted it as if this type of thing hadn't just happened once or twice. In fact, there were many monsters that were summoned because of Diablo. In cases where clearing it was possible, unimaginable rewards were received. However, there were more than 5 cities that had disappeared because they were unable to suppress it. Even more, the bastards didn't only attack places where people were. There were also monsters that entered the demon gods' territories and attacked the residents. Bells rang everywhere. It was a call to order for those belonging to clans to return. It was for the immediate suppression of Ifrit. If this type of matter was finished quickly, it would be good. There were many cases where things became more complicated if time dragged on. What will happen to this world? But didn't Diablo cause a demon god to go extinct? Horrors. He was also a demon god that handled fire. It seemed that what Diablo wanted was really the destruction of the world. He had destroyed 5 cities, and even worse, he had killed Horrors. Diablo had no enemies or allies. Therefore he was even more dangerous. It made his future actions completely unpredictable. It was like walking past a nuclear bomb. But, "Are you blind or something?" Gasp. At that moment, a peddler bumped into a man whose body was covered in a shabby cloak. However, the moment the peddler saw the man's eyes, he backed away in fright. The man in the shabby cloak only revealed 2 black pupils. "Be careful." The peddler fled as if escaping. The man loitered around unconcernedly. The fountain of light. The man adjusted the long sword at his waist. Then he left the noble city and headed in the direction of the fountain of light. It has already been 2 years. As soon as he was out of the noble castle, the man took off his cloak. Then there was no flesh on the body that was revealed. Only bones. A death knight composed of only bones. He was none other than Taken. "Where are you?" 2 years had passed since his owner Muyang had disappeared. 2 years later, the strong discipline that had tied them together had also weakened. The connection between them had also slackened. However, all the undead, starting with Taken, were looking for Muyang. Muyang was their master and their goal. There were few undead that followed Muyang without a story. Taken especially interfered in all activity involving Diablo. However, 2 years had already passed and he had been unable to find Muyang's whereabouts. However, he never thought Muyang was dead. No one did. No matter what, Muyang would not die. He was like an immortal. "I have now become strong enough to have a match with you." Taken had grown rapidly in 2 years. He found and sparred with the people that were called strong and absorbed everything from them. Even worse, a considerable number of those who were called 10 strongest had met Taken. However, Muyang, who was his true objective, had disappeared and thrown him away. He couldn't give up until he fought this match properly. But Gabriel's spear stuck into the ground. Gabriel's spear was not a physical substance. There was a prophecy, but Muyang already had it. Muyang had awakened Gabriel's spear on Suicide Hill, so the prophecy could not have been a lie. At any rate, Gabriel's spear had transformed into a powerful skill that could suppress an opponent. As the spear stuck into the ground, all the spirits stopped moving. The only things that could move unimpeded in this space were Muyang and Ifrit. The top-class spirits tried to move under the restrictions, but the 5 fire bone dragons blocked them. Fung. Anguish moved leisurely. Like that, it flowed freely again in one moment and then quickly advanced. It seemed to be dancing, but it was brutally practical. It was incredibly free. All grains were within range of the Muyang sword. The Muyang sword had found a rival for the first time. "Are you the one who reached extremity?" Ifrit was impressed. He was fire. He was that pure. When it reached extremity, everything was pure. He spoke with a sense of kinship and awe. But Muyang grinned. "Extremity? It's still a long way off." The Muyang sword was still incomplete. If all Muyang's knowledge, the knowledge from Gabriel's spear and the senses awakened by pure fire were combined, it would only be about 50%. The remaining half was being made. Perhaps this number was also incorrect. To that extent, there were no limits to the sword that Muyang made. "I hope." A smiling Muyang looked at Ifrit. And he spoke with a matchlessly urgent expression. "You don't fall until I have finished wielding my sword." Muyang's sword was a swordsmanship made up of a total of 100 strikes. Muyang had finished 50 strikes among them. Would Ifrit be able to withstand all 50 strikes? Muyang was curious. How powerful was the swordsmanship he had created? He had created this swordsmanship by combining all his knowledge, the experience he had gained at Diablo's altar, and the fire and Gabriel's spear he had earned. There were lots of things he had gained, but among them his most favorite of them all was, of course, Muyang's sword. The swordsmanship that contained Muyang's life itself. Enlightenment is like an instant. However, to reach enlightenment it took a long time. Within the source of fire, Muyang had been wandering around for a long time. He fought with the evil that resided inside him, and after wandering for a long time he had now found his place. Quite a bit of time in the real world would have passed as well. From now on, Muyang was going to correct all his past mistakes. The mistakes that he made and those made by humanity, everything. Although he couldn't say all the things he did were correct. Muyang, I'm different from you. I'll live my own life. In the past, when Muyang was young, there was another Muyang that existed within his memories before he was brainwashed. Although he had died in this life due to Muyang, Muyang didn't have any regrets or guilt, as he also would want that from him. However, Muyang wasn't planning to die again. He wasn't planning to give up what he had either. Infinite freedom. Muyang could become anything. You are that first step. He swung his sword. Swoosh. Anguish cried. Ain's eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. The fire spirit was not in a bad relationship with the fire dragons. If he was an ancient fire dragon, it was normal for him to not fight a being like the fire spirit king. That should be the case, but the two were crazily fighting each other. Even more, the fire spirit king was the one lacking. Who is this person? He had never seen that sort of swordsmanship. She did see a couple of people who were considered geniuses in swordsmanship, but they were not even close to Muyang's swordsmanship. Only then did Ain change her thoughts. That person wasn't a fire dragon. A horn, wings, fire, and sword, a spear that could stop the movements of spirits and bone dragons. She had never seen anyone that possessed this much power before. Truly a being greater than a dragon. Among them, the real deal was, of course, the sword. It was like the sword owner himself. Muyang restlessly wielded his sword. If you considered each move, it wasn't that threatening, but as if he was drawing a picture, it was flexible and elegant swordsmanship. Even Ain, who didn't know of swordsmanship, was able to understand that when the picture was completed, even Spirit King Ifrit won't be able to survive this. Ha! Ain turned her head as she was startled. Someone beside her had let out a sigh. Even if she was unprepared for her to not notice until the person stood next to her. She was a high elf. She received the moon's blessing. Even if someone was to move secretly in the dark, she was able to know all about it. However, the man that approached her from the side didn't show any presence. She couldn't feel life within him. Like a ghost. Death Knight. Yes, he was no different than a ghost. An undead made out of just bones. A Death Knight, which was known to be one of the strongest undead, was standing beside Ain. However, it wasn't a normal Death Knight. In the past, Ain had seen a few Death Knights who controlled liches. They were clearly strong, but they couldn't pressure Ain, as Ain was strong enough to face most ancient dragons. However, the Death Knight in front of her was different. Bastard. I was wondering where you went, but you were staying at a place like this. The Death Knight shook his head. At the same time, Ain's empathy skill was fully demonstrated. Unlike his tone, she felt his joy. This feeling was like seeing a cat who just reunited with his owner. He wasn't an enemy. Rather, he was the opposite. Ain was able to notice that the one the Death Knight thought of as his enemy was, instead, Ifrit. Blaze. Ain turned his head. Red lights were pouring over Muyang's head. An owner of a star. Star of the Absolute. It was also different from the past. The red light was much stronger. Ain couldn't help but close her eyes as she saw the intense light that spanned the whole spring. You will die if you stay still. The Death Knight advised her. Ain opened her eyes, and at the same time, the Death Knight wielded his sword. Slash. The spirit was sliced. Numerous spirits were slowly moving. The Death Knight, Taken, was not going to stay still and watch. Although it's annoying, it seems like he has created his own sword. Although he wasn't smiling, he looked like he was smiling. If he was a living being, he would have trembled with excitement. Slash. A half-translucent spirit was sliced by Taken's sword. Taken's sword was like a very tightly knitted web. He restrained a few hundred spirits in his area and hunted them. A swordsman who was at his peak. Taken's sword was very exquisite. It became sharper. He became stronger. But Taken's eyes were only looking at Muyang's and Ifrit's fight. Muyang had disappeared for 2 years. But Muyang had become so much stronger that the gap was insignificant. As much as Taken had become stronger, perhaps even more. Taken was able to see that Muyang had become stronger mentally as well as physically. After seeing Muyang, he had been instantly reconnected. Also, that connection had become stronger than before. Most undead will trust you and follow you as their master again. Taken was no different. Just he was more competitive than other undead. Wouldn't all the undead follow him like how I followed him at a glance? There wouldn't be a lot of people who would instantly trust and follow a person who had disappeared for 2 years. Taken was able to believe after seeing Muyang fight with Ifrit now, but it was hard to think that all undead would be the same. Nevertheless, Taken was not worried at all. This is enough. The current Muyang was enough to erase all concerns. First strike, second strike, 23rd strike, 24th strike. How could a strength that isn't godly do something to me? Ifrit was taken back. His arrogant appearance from the beginning had slowly disappeared. Could only be the case. As more strikes were made through Muyang's sword, it became stronger by multiple times. Also, although there wasn't any godly strength, Muyang himself was like a storage of godliness. Lucifer, Diablo's fire, Gabriel's wings and spear. They all contained godliness, and besides Lucifer's strength, Muyang was able to freely use them all. If Muyang was able to control this power a bit more maturely, he would be able to reach demigod level. A true transcendental being. What was more, Muyang's sword had everything melted within it. The ability to even produce a huge injury on Ifrit's body. At last, the 40th strike. The fire was split. One of Ifrit's arms had been cut off. The fire that was cut off didn't regenerate. It was because Muyang had sliced the grains and cut off the connection. Muyang did not allow the fire to re-enter the area itself again. Muyang's sword was inclusive of everything, but to be exact, it was a strength to control space. The ability to erase space, ability execution of space. Receive the baptism of fire. Blaze. Pearl. Small flames poured endlessly from the sky. It was smaller in scale compared to Diablo, but it fell down condensed enough that it was enough to destroy everything it touched. 41 ST strike. Swoosh. With just 40 strikes, Ifrit's defense was penetrated. Muyang understood his space and eroded it. So now it was completely Muyang's turn. At the 41st strike, both of Ifrit's arms flew off. 42nd strike. He cut out all the flames that dropped in his surroundings. 43rd strike. By using 32-fold acceleration, he used numerous formless strikes. 44th strike. Anguish had cut the space itself where Muyang and Ifrit stood. Then the great explosion disappeared. Ifrit's body had started to become thinner. I won't die. When spirits die, they just get summoned again. By returning to the spirit world, he would get some rest and recover again. And so it was commonly known for spirits to not die. As this occurs to even ordinary spirits, the Spirit King would not die in ordinary ways. However, would that really be the case? Muyang raised Anguish. Ifrit said he doesn't die? There weren't any beings like that. Everything died. Even beings that are known as immortals also died. Even gods faced the disappearance called death. Towards a place not visible, Muyang used execution of space. So in total 45 strikes. Muyang cut off the pathway that connected Ifrit to another world. How could a mere human cut off space? This isn't possible. Ifrit knew about Muyang's real identity. No matter how much strength he was able to use, there was always a form of the source. However, that was why it was more unbelievable. There were no events in the past where a human killed a spirit king. That wasn't all. The star of the Absolute scattered redder light. Then Ifrit's body became dust and started to be absorbed into the star. The star of the Absolute has absorbed Star of Fire. The rank of Star of the Absolute has increased. S+ to S++. Slayer of Kings has been activated. All pure stats have increased by 15. You have killed 65 types of kings. There are now 35 types left until 100. Muyang moved to reach into Ifrit's body. Then he grabbed a fire residue that existed in the middle and poured it into his mouth. You are absorbing Spirit King's fire residue. True fire attributes has increased by 20. You have killed the Fire Spirit King Ifrit. Contribution 200%. You have exceeded the gift that could be given by the Masters of Darkness. Death Lord has offered for you to be his true successor. Do you accept? If you do accept, all classes would be deleted and you can become a Death Lord. Lord class, Death Lord. Muyang had just taken a few skills from Death Lord. It was hard to say he was truly a Death Lord. However, he had received the possibility to go beyond that and become a Death Lord himself. I refuse. However, Muyang shook his head. He was definitely covetous of Death Lord's strength. If he was to accept it now, he could become much stronger than he was right now. As all classes would disappear and he would have only one. However, in this world there was no offer that was just sweet. The moment he becomes a Death Lord, he would need to give up his own path again. Until now, Death Lord's power just supported Muyang. But he couldn't become it itself. It wasn't just for Death Lord's strength, but all strength was so. It could be a supporting power, but it couldn't be the main source of his power. You have refused Death Lord's offer. Shadow Lord has offered for you to be his true successor. Do you accept? If you do accept, all classes would be deleted and you can become a Shadow Lord. I refuse. One by one, the names of the rest of Masters of Darkness had popped up. The number was 10. As there were 11 Masters of Darkness, it was all besides Kingslayer. Although he was curious why this sort of offer was given all of a sudden, Muyang had refused them all. Even though their offer was definitely sweet, and the rewards they gave were also amazing, it wasn't enough to give up Muyang's own uniqueness.